me today, and we'll get right to it here. And of course, do put any questions that you may have in the Q&A. The introduction and the slides that we'll share will explain some of what I'm telling you. And this is really a fun little 15, 20, 30-minute discussion about construction in general, and certainly my favorite place to visit when I was doing inspections was in the crawl space, because all kinds of stuff happens there. So let's get started here. We can find the beginning. Let's just see if this is it. There we go. Okay, so here we go with the crawl space. So when we talk about crawl spaces in general, where did that start? And so when we start thinking about crawl spaces, we think about perhaps in the pioneer times, where homes were built pretty much in the ground. So to think about a log cabin, a wood structure that had a dirt floor. And of course, when you dealt with dirt floors and original housing, there was an issue always with critters. All kinds of critters would come out of the dirt inside the structure, the snakes and the rodents, etc. So folks kind of built the homes up off the ground a little bit, and pretty much what they started out doing was sort of in the corners, they would place stones and raise the structure up off of the dirt, and then you would have an open space underneath the home. And then as we moved on to construction technique, we were putting in foundations that were raised up again off the ground, put in a forest system. And originally when heat was being installed, we had central heating elements, like the beginnings of a furnace, a gas furnace perhaps, and they were in the floor in a hallway, and the actual metal structure itself was below the floor. So we needed access to that heating system in order to service it. And also, once we got to indoor plumbing, we needed access to that as well. So when we're dealing with actual crawl spaces, today we're kind of looking at a concrete slab or a full basement. The cost of land has gotten so expensive now, and the lots have gotten a lot smaller as well. So now people tend to either put that on a slab. Nobody's building new construction pretty much with crawl spaces anymore. So simply furnaces now go into attic spaces, or onto the slab, and maybe in the garage or in a closet somewhere. Heat pumps that are electrical, it's all like that. So what we needed was, as I mentioned, was access to plumbing and the structure underneath for the crawl spaces. And we talk about how we are going to get into the crawl spaces, because if they are there, we need to be able to have access in order to get up underneath and look at the structure, look at the plumbing, look at the foundation. All of those items are really important information to gather for the buyer. So the minimum requirement is actually 16 inches by 24 inches. 18 by 23, or perhaps 18 by 24 through the floor from an interior of a home. So this is what we're looking at right here, is an access that we could use to get into a crawl space, because sometimes, as you can see, the dirt is actually up pretty high here, but there's actually a section right behind this door that has been dug out. And being that we are below grade here, you can see how they've built in a little structure to hold back any kind of water that would flow in around the door, and this would be a good method of getting into the crawl space. For somebody like me who's has a 48-inch chest, weigh 225, and I'm 6'1", getting into even a 16 by 24-inch opening is a bit of a challenge. And the whole idea is that from the bottom of the floor joist to the dirt, we need to have a 16-inch clearance. So you can imagine that really it's not a crawl so much as a drag or a slither through there. And when there's no vapor barrier, it can get kind of messy and dirty in there. But our goal is to touch all four corners of that crawl space. We want to get up underneath all of the plumbing or the structure that's there to see if there are any issues that we can report in our actual inspection. You can see here how we access down on the interior of a home in a hallway actually, and this is the way we can get in on this particular home. And then of course on the outside, we can see here how we get up underneath there from a section of the deck that's removed in order to provide access to the crawl space. We see another example here of a room that allows us to get into the crawl space right here. So here we are, that's me. So you can see I'm a pretty big guy back in the day. Haven't been in a crawl space in about 4 years now. So pre-COVID, I was already, marketing and actually doing other work for HomeProbe, and I'm still with them today. But here we see me getting my mask on, and of course goggles, flashlight, and everything else that I need to get in underneath this crawl space here. So as we mentioned, minimum height requirement 24 inches between the ground of the crawl space and the bottom of the floor joist. And here's an example of getting up underneath. And so we're in, and in actual fact, if you count the bricks, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 is 20 inches. So we just about make it on that 24-inch requirement for us to get in there, and so we are. There's all kinds of interesting stuff down there in these crawl spaces. On the left-hand side of this picture, there's a major termite collection that we see here. We also see that there is no vapor barrier in this particular crawl space. So in an inspection report, there would be a recommendation to install a plastic vapor barrier, and certainly to have a termite company to come in and deal with this tunnel that we have, and treat as needed. So as you can see from this one, we have water intrusion on the back of this block foundation. We see it's really dark back here, and you can see all the moisture on the actual walls. The foundation walls are actually not waterproof. These cement blocks or masonry blocks, they're porous. And so what we know is moisture does eventually make its way through. In this particular case, it's pretty nasty. The insulation has fallen down into the moist areas here, and we really need to address this situation. So usually what the simple fix on these things is the drainage. So if we can alter the drainage for the slope to be away from the house on the outside, simple things like extending the downspouts at least 6 feet away from the house, perhaps putting in a drainage system around the home to get the water away, that would be a beginning point to do there. Because what does actually happen is when you've got moisture like we see here, it's kind of a dark, damp, warm space pretty much. That is an actual perfect breeding ground for the M word that nobody wants to see on an inspection report, which is mold. This is a pretty bad one right here, where you see the mold is actually eating away at the floor joist and weakening the structure. So what we want to do there is get all of this stuff cleared out, treated, and if there's any weak structure involved here, then what we want to do is perhaps sister some new joists into place besides the existing. Instead of having to rip out everything, we could clean all the mold out, and perhaps even do an encapsulation to this crawl space, where we'd stop any moisture and air from getting in, and therefore not allowing the mold to grow. We can see right here where we actually have standing water. Now, when we have an issue like standing water in a crawl space, we don't go in there simply for safety reasons. That being, there might be an electrical wire touching some of this water, and we could hurt ourselves doing that. So would not go into a crawl space with water like this. So we look about, of course, as we mentioned, going ahead and redirecting the water around the foundation of the house, and then, of course, encapsulation. And this is what encapsulation looks like, where the vents to the foundation are actually closed off, and the barrier on the ground is sealed, and then the continuation of the plastic barrier up on the walls to the ceiling joist area. This totally cuts out any moisture or air into the area. And you could always use a dehumidifier, a fan, to extract any moisture that was in there for a while until it was to the point where there was no more moisture being formed in the crawl space. The advent of foam insulation is something, and you can see some of that here, where they've actually covered the dirt with foam insulation. Down below at the bottom of the picture, you see that plastic vapor barrier that's down there as well. The issue with putting in foam into a crawl space, it does provide protection from moisture for sure, and it also does give us some savings on heating and cooling by applying it to the floor joist. But when you cover it like this, as an inspector, we cannot see any of the items that we would want to on a foundation wall, or perhaps between the joists, or even the joists themselves. So any kind of plumbing or electrical or the actual structure that would be covered by foam insulation, we would not be able to comment on that. And that would go into our report as a limitation because we could not physically see it. You got to bear in mind that an inspection is actually a inspection of visible items. So if everything was covered with foam insulation, it would not be a visible inspection anymore. So we're also concerned about cracks in the foundation. You see this is called a stair-step crack, and we've got more than a 1/4 inch here. In actual fact, we see some movement here in this particular foundation. The stair-step crack is pretty common, usually found in areas where there is a little bit of settling. And we find in this particular picture, you can see that the actual masonry block is moving here. Because of that hydrostatic pressure on the exterior, the water is actually in the dirt and pushing against this foundation. The picture section here on the left, you can see the darkened spots, also some moisture up here in the joist. This is actually pretty common when we do not extend the downspouts away from the house, where they spill out right next to the corner of the foundation. So this is the same sort of thing that we would see when there's a downspout again dropping right next to the corner of the foundation. Usually there's a reciprocal same sort of stair-step crack on the perpendicular wall on the other side. So what we want to do there is have this addressed. If you see sort of something like this when you're showing a home, be a good idea perhaps, instead of getting an inspection set up right away, maybe you'd want to go ahead and have a structural engineer have a look at this, certainly if the gaps are fairly large as they are here, because the inspection from a structural engineer would actually have a scope of work of what needs to be done to address this and repair this particular item. And of course, the same with this situation right here. Well, here you can see where some concrete is actually being poured in. There's the original cement block. You can see actually they've got some supports back here. So we've had some settling here for a while, and now they've put in other walls here. There's an actual crack in this back wall, so the hydrostatic pressure is still working there. We've had some of this walls being actually pushed away. So you do realize by looking at this that the hydrostatic pressure is pretty strong. We do see a vapor barrier down here, and this is another way that it can be addressed. So if we're still getting moisture into our crawl space and we want to deal with any kind of mold growth, we have a pump right here that's installed down in a well, in a low part of the actual crawl space area. And we should have a designated electrical outlet, perhaps even a GFI, that's connected to the pump. And when the float kind of comes up in this area here, when it starts to fill up, it'll eject the water on out to the exterior of the home. All kinds of critters are in the crawl space. Mice, rats, possums, squirrels, raccoons, snakes. I never saw a live snake, but I saw some of their skins from time to time getting in there. And in one particular instance, I was doing a crawl space, and being that it was a little bit less than the 24 inches, it was actually closer to about 18. I actually got stuck, wedged beneath some of the cast iron piping there, and then I heard some squeaking and kind of scratching up ahead of me, and I put my flashlight onto it, and sure enough, there was a family of possums in there, and they weren't happy that I was in their habitat, and I wanted to get out pretty quick. Eventually did actually get out of there, and when I crawled back out of the crawl space, and the buyer looked at me and he saw what kind of a mess I was in, he asked me, is everything really bad down there? And I explained to him, hey, being that you've got critters down there, we'd probably need to have those removed. And the reason why I went in there that close was because there had been some rot that I noticed under the kitchen sink. I wanted to see if there was any structural damage there. So what we need there is just to remove the cabinet, because it would need to be replaced anyway, being that it was damaged. Have your critters removed, put a new base cabinet in there, and if there was some minor structural work, that's what it involved. And he went ahead and bought that property. It was a duplex, and I think by the time he sold it, he told me it made something in the region of about 300% on his capital gains, and then he rolled that over and moved into 2 more units, and very, very happy. So it's not only just reporting, it's how you report it, how you share the message. That's really important. So we can see here that the furnaces are still in crawl spaces. They are installed there. And as long as they're off of the surface of the dirt, we're good. If not, we would report it, certainly because, again, there is moisture in the dirt, and we would rust out the bottom of this cabinet that holds the furnace. Now, what we deal with here is in the left-hand picture, we'd need a vapor barrier. On the right side, you can still see here this moisture was slightly raised up off the ground, but if you did have a lot of moisture coming into the area, we'd have an issue there. In the bottom corner here, we have a sump pump, so we are somewhat protected. But this is, again, an area that has been enclosed below the dirt level in the crawl space. We can see here we have an ejection for a condensate line as well. So they're doing best things they can, but they have not addressed the water into the crawl space area right here. So that would need to be taken care of. And when you have a crawl space that's low, like this one is for a homeowner, you can figure on the maintenance of changing our filters would not be done on a regular basis. And what we really need to do is our maintenance. And filters from a furnace should be changed every 90 days for a quality furnace filter. So we need to do that at least 4 times a year, perhaps going with an electronic filter or with a once-a-year filter might be a better idea and a recommendation for the buyer. But if you've got a standard filter in there, we'd want to make sure somebody would go in there and change it, or else you're going to shorten the life expectancy of our furnaces there. We're looking here, of course, again, no vapor barrier, but we're looking at supports for a sagging floor repair. So the main beam that's running across right here in this crawl space is being supported by these temporary supports. In this case, they're actually referred to as temporary, but they do have a footing here. They do have a little foundation to it. So this is more of a permanent installation here under the floor. And, it's kind of always amazed me in all the years that I was doing the inspections that contractors, perhaps doing repairs, don't think that somebody's going to come behind them and check and see if anything was done or not done correctly. The bottom line is most city inspectors don't go into crawl spaces. I hadn't met any that did. But here's a situation where perhaps some permitting wasn't done. And you can see there was a beam here originally supported on this brick pier back here. There's also a plank running on this side, which should have had some supports. You can see the support on this side. So there was work that was undone here, no beam installed. So this one was probably rotted or malfunctioning in some way, sagging perhaps. And they took the old one out, but never to put the new one back in there. So certainly this would have needed to be addressed and gone into the report. We can see here the mold that's on this one, and this was really low. This is like barely 18 inches. Got a 16, an 8-inch cap block here, plus another 2-3 inches, so 11, 12 inches. It was a challenge to get in, but we did have a vapor barrier down. However, there was still moisture getting in, as you can see by the mold that was in this particular situation. You see here several temporary supports sitting on what we call a cap block. Just a cement block there. That's insufficient support for the floor system as you see it. And there are all kinds of different ways that people would come in and put stacked up wood, and even this masonry block that's here is installed incorrectly. It should have been 90 degrees over so that the holes that you see there were vertical instead of horizontal to give it some more support. So you can see support here, support there, it's all temporary stuff. This is an old carpentry method that was used to join joists in order to get a longer span, where they'd have actually mortise and tenon they're notched out and nailed to each other. Don't see that around anymore. Most of our floor joists now are engineered wood and I-joists and trusses, but this would have needed a support on this side as well. And this one's actually being held up by a 2x4 temporarily. And as you can see, even the metal one, there's still moisture there, so it's rusting. So would it need to have perhaps a cement block or brick pier or something of more substantive to hold up this particular section. And here you can see how the moisture is really, the mold has grown, and now it's weakened the actual floor joist that's here, and the structure. You can see how this whole support has rusted away, and the wood is so weak that it's being crushed by the weight that's above pushing down here. Let me see here some termite damage. We're actually not termite inspectors, but we obviously are in there, and when we see the damage, we will comment on it, photograph it, and have it in the report as well. A little bit more of that. Again, termite damage there, same house location. And then my favorite is this one right here. So this is a great advertisement for Rubbermaid. And this particular situation was a renovation where the shower stall had the drain pan had rotted and fallen in, and they remodeled that whole thing. And then instead of putting a proper support underneath that area, they went ahead and stuck this little contraption with all the stackable stuff in there in order to hold up the floor. So again, either A, not permitted, or B, permitted but not checked out and signed off by the county. Always going to be a photograph of the water shutoff. That's really important for homeowners to know in case of an emergency. Want to make sure that folks know where the water shutoff is. Here's one in another part of the crawl space. So that's what they can look like. This is a more modern one on a PVC water supply pipe. Here we are with copper and galvanized steel. So we've got our water shutoff right there. And then we can see again the moisture on the outside wall of the foundation, where we see that moisture here. Terminology, efflorescence. We see that white powder and stuff on the inside of the foundation. So even here with that moisture barrier, we do see water intrusion, which would need to be addressed there. We do have that sump pump located down here again in a crawl space area. And again, at the corner. So it could be just the small issue of going ahead and putting in an extension to the downspout bottom elbow. Rot underneath the floor, we're going to see that, so that's why we want to get up underneath the bathrooms. It could be something simple like there's caulking missing on the side of the tub. And because of that, water's coming down and rotting out some of the floor right there. It just depends on where we are and how we can report. There it is. So columns, when we have temporary supports with no issues, here we have, it's pressure treated lumber sitting on some wood. We'd like to see something more substantial, have some metal support there in its place. Even some movement in the foundation, and if you look carefully right above here, there's some termite tunnels up here as well. So that would definitely be an issue that you would have a contractor get in there and check it out. And then supports right here, we would need FHA straps in place, which are required. They were not in place here. So we see various different supports in crawl spaces. Says here $200 to $400 a piece to get that little eel straightened out. Okay, all kinds of stuff. I mean, there were pieces of trunks of trees, pieces of you name it. If there was anything there available to prop up a floor on this main beam, it was used. The one thing that's good about this one is that the concrete blocks were installed correctly or stacked correctly. But even in a crawl space, I mean, something weird, like somebody built a wall out of old batteries. To me, it's okay, you got batteries in here, the least you could have done is put them the right way up. So also looking at in crawl spaces, we're looking at a lot of electrical work. If there wasn't foam here, we wouldn't be, if there was foam, we wouldn't be able to see it, but we'd like to see these installed with a cap on them. They're a few bucks a piece. A lot of this gets missed, open splices, etc. We just want everything secured in there in case there's a shortage or if there's a spark that perhaps could cause some damage here with ignition to insulation and becomes a fire hazard. Again, missing insulation sometimes, we're finding that, and we're just saying that's a minor fix right there. Plumbing, when we're checking it out, it's from one end to the other. You can see here we're dripping a little bit. So this is an old one. You want to go ahead and have that replaced. And you see there's a nut right here. There's another one on top. It's literally a 30-minute fix for a plumber. Take out a regulator and replace it. Not a big deal at all. We want to make sure that the water pressure is correctly monitored and adjusted to in the crawl space. Sometimes when we're dealing with this older cast iron piping, it's now really kind of reaching the end of its life expectancy. And there are issues that happen. They get little pinholes in them, rust, cracks, etc. They can be fixed piecemeal. Suggestion probably is a better idea to go ahead and have it replaced on a remodeling job and be done with it. It gets more expensive cutting out pieces and over time constantly doing that. So my personal opinion is go ahead and replace it all at one shot. Also with the furnace ducts, insulation that falls off. Nowadays, most folks don't use solid ductwork anymore. It's pretty much all insulated, flexible ductwork. But this is visible on some of the older resales that we might find out there. And that is it. So we're right at 12:29. So I'm going to stop the share right there and kind of ask you all if you have any questions or into the chat column, you can pop them in. I'll stay as long as you need me to answer any questions that you might have, and happy to do so. So I'll kind of give you all a minute or two to pop something into the Q&A. And if not, we'll call it a day. This is actually the last of the 6 webinars that we do. If you go to Home Probe Academy, you can check in and see we have Zoom CEs, and also you could check in your office with your folks that do CE. in your own personal offices that you're connected with, we'd be happy to come in and do a 3-hour CE class at your location. Okay, so Mitch, so Mitch has asked if I would prefer a slab home over one with a crawl space. Well, from a personal point of view at this point, I would think that any inspector would prefer to have one on a slab, because you wouldn't have to go into the nasty crawl space. But if it's a choice of having one or the other, I think a slab at this point would be better to have. Thanks for the inquiry, though. Anybody else? Okay, if that's it, wish you all a great day. And yep, if you'd like to set up us to visit you in your office to teach a CE, contact us at HomeProbe, 404-218-1040, and we'll be happy to oblige. So have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.